Welcome to the Diabetes Maven, the podcast for women who are done feeling stuck and ready to take control of type 2 diabetes. I'm your host, Stephanie, a nurse practitioner and type 2 diabetic, and a woman on a mission to help you ditch diabetes for good. If you've ever felt frustrated by confusing advice, tired of the blood sugar roller coasters, and wondered if true healing is even possible, you're in the right place. Each week, we'll talk about what really moves the needle, from balancing your blood sugar, your metabolism, building healthy mindsets, and eating smarter, moving with purpose, and strengthening your faith along the way. Because managing diabetes isn't just about numbers. It's about freedom, energy, and living the life God designed for you, without complications. Subscribe to the Diabetes Maven wherever you listen to podcasts, and let's take this journey together. Now, most people with type 2 diabetes know that complications are possible, but very few understand the exact reason for driving all of them. Today, we're talking about microvascular damage and something called advanced glycation end products. What are they? How they work? And the 3 things you can do right now to slow them down. This one can change the way you think about your diabetes forever. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ditching Diabetes. I'm Stephanie, your host, a nurse practitioner, and someone who is personally living at the intersection of clinical knowledge and a very real daily challenge of managing blood sugar. This is the place where we talk about all of it: the science, the struggle, the small wins, and the strategies that actually move the needle. Today's episode is one I've been thinking about for a while, and I really want to be upfront with you. It's kind of on the serious level, and it's personal because today we're talking about something that I watched happen to my own father as he lost his vision and a few amputations. And I'm going to use his story to help you understand something that could genuinely change your health outcomes if you take it seriously. All right? So I want you to settle in, grab your coffee, your water, your tea, whatever you got, and we're going deep today. It's a serious topic, and I promise you, by the end of this episode, you're going to understand your body in a way that most people with type 2 diabetes don't. Do you know what high blood sugar is actually doing inside of your body right now? And I'm not talking about the abstract complications or a bad way that we all hear about at our doctor's appointments. I'm talking about the specific process that is happening in your blood vessels and your nerves and your eyes and your kidneys. If your blood sugar is running higher than normal, do you know what's happening? And here's what I've learned over many years of clinical practice: that most people with type 2 diabetes have heard all the list of complications, right? You've heard of blindness, you know what kidney failure is, you know what nerve damage is, you know what an amputation is, and heart disease. And the list can be long and it's scary and it's real. But most people haven't really sat down to explain what is really the driver behind all of those complications. There is a common thread, and what's happening is actually at a microscopic level that actually shows up and causes these life altering outcomes. And I think that I want to fill the gap in this episode between all the complications and what's happening before we get there. Now, there is a term for this process, and it's called microvascular damage. Fancy long term. And really something called AGs. It's advanced glycation end products. We're going to call them AGs because that's their acronym, and also because that's exactly what they do. They age you. They're aging your blood vessels from the inside out. So let's just start with the basics, okay? Your body is actually an enormous network of blood vessels. You've got large blood vessels and tiny blood vessels, and we're talking about 60,000 miles worth. That's a lot, right? 60,000 miles actually, the Earth is about 25,000 miles all around. So you could actually go around every single person, just mind-boggling to me, twice, plus have more left over if you went around the Earth, okay? And some scientists even say we have 100,000 miles worth of blood vessels in our bodies. That is crazy, okay? Now you got the large ones, you got the big ones, and most of the time the large ones get the most attention, right? You got the heart attack and the large aneurysms and stroke and all of that. But the ones that drive these complications are microvessels, which are also called capillaries, and they're tiny vessels that are in your circulatory system, which is your blood, where all the blood travels. They reach all of your tissues directly and deliver exactly what they need, from oxygen, nutrients, just about everything. Your eyes and your kidneys and your heart, all of them depend on these tiny blood vessels so that they can be healthy and functioning, right? And these tiny blood vessels that are all throughout your body are vulnerable to high blood sugar, unfortunately. And here's what happens when your blood sugar runs high over time, excess glucose molecules, which is the sugar, start to attach themselves to proteins throughout your body. To these proteins in your blood vessel walls, to the collagen in your tissues, to the proteins in your nerve fibers. This whole process is called glycation. Now, just a little glycation happens to everyone, whether or not you're diabetic. It is actually a normal part of aging. Your A1C test that you get every 3 months is actually measuring a form of glycation. It's measuring how much glucose has actually attached to your hemoglobin protein over the last 3 months. That is what the A1C is, glycated hemoglobin. But when the blood sugar is chronically elevated, glycation happens far faster and far more extensively than the body is actually designed to handle. And here's where it gets really serious. When glycation happens repeatedly over months, over years, those sugar coated proteins don't just stay sticky. They undergo a chemical transformation. They start linking together, they cross link with other neighboring proteins, and they begin to harden. And this is what scientists call advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. Think about what happens when you cook a piece of steak at high heat. The outside browns, it gets a little crust, and the meat actually stiffens, right? Browning is actually a form of glycation happening rapidly under heat. It's actually called the Maillard reaction, and this is the same basic chemical happening inside of your body, just at a slower pace driven by chronically elevated blood sugar instead of a hot pan. And just like the brown piece of meat, AGEs make things stiff, rigid, less functional. This same thing happens to the microvessels that makes them thick and stiff and leaky. All of the AGEs begin to accumulate like in the places of your kidneys, impairing filtration. They accumulate in the nerve tissue, disrupting how signals travel, and they generate something called oxidative stress. Maybe you've heard of oxidation in terms of antioxidants. You want to eat your fruit and vegetables, or certain vitamins are antioxidant. That's because every day our body undergoes oxidative stress, whether it's from cortisol or things that we eat or having a sedentary lifestyle or a metabolic disease like in diabetes. Oxidative stress is essentially a flood of damaging molecules that injure cells all throughout our body. They bind to specific receptors on blood vessel linings called, this is you ready for it? Rage receptors. I know. Crazy name, but AGE, it's a receptor for advanced glycated end products. And it triggers a whole cascade of inflammation that accelerates damage even more. So it's a catch 20. Here's the part that I really need you to hear. AGEs, once they're formed, are extremely difficult for the body to clear. They can be reversed. You can minimize the damage and you can reduce the amount of damage over time if you start doing other things, but they build up and they accumulate over years. The damage they cause does not easily reverse itself. And that's why this intervention, the early intervention, matters so much. And that's why I keep saying that now is the time to act, whether or not you're newly diagnosed or been diagnosed with diabetes for a long time. It's never too late to start reversing course. Because by the time the symptoms actually appear, the AGs have been building in your tissues for years. Now, another thing I want to talk about AGs is that they don't only come from the inside of your body, they also come from your food. I know. It's so disappointing to think about another thing that you can't eat. Now, foods that are cooked in high heat, like grilled meats, like barbecue, fried foods, ultra processed packaged foods, anything that's brown or charred, they contain dietary AGs. And the most disappointing thing that I found out that has AGs are roasted nuts. Like, come on. I mean, nuts, these are healthy. And so all of these things that you are eating also contribute to AGEs that are damaging your blood vessels, right? There was a study that was done in 2010 in the journal Circulation found that people eating diets and high dietary AGEs had significantly higher markers of oxidative stress and inflammation independent of their blood sugar levels. So let me say that again, because this is so important. Even if your blood sugar is reasonably controlled, a diet and high fried, Barbecued, charred, ultra processed food that's still loading your bodies with AGE and driving inflammation in your blood vessels. This is why our food choices matter in ways that go beyond blood sugar numbers. It is not only about the glucose spike, it is also about the total AGE load you're asking your body to deal with every single day. Okay, now I want to connect the dots between the biology we just talked about and the complications you've heard of at all the doctor's visits or your diabetic educator class. Because when you understand this mechanism, the complications stop feeling like a random list of bad luck and start making complete sense. So let's talk about the eyes first. Okay, diabetic retinopathy is the leading cause of blindness in working age adults in the United States. And that's not a small statistic. This is an enormous public health crisis that it does not get enough attention. Okay, but here's what's actually happened. You have a retina, the light sensitive tissue that's in the back of your eyes, the one that allows you to see. It's the most metabolically active tissue in your entire body. It has incredibly high energy demands and it needs constant, reliable supply of blood from a dense network of microvessels to function. So when AGs accumulate in those vessels, the vessels stiffen and become leaky. And they develop tiny weak spots called microaneurysms and they begin to hemorrhage. Leak fluid into the retina. Vision eventually becomes distorted and eventually lost if not stopped. In advanced cases, the body tries to grow new blood vessels to compensate, but those new vessels are disorganized and fragile, and they cause usually more damage than they fix. This is called proliferative diabetic retinopathy, and it can cause sudden severe vision loss. Now, next up, your nerves. Peripheral neuropathy is one of the most common complications of type 2 diabetes. You have the numbness, some people complain of tingling, a burning sensation, and general pain in your feet or toes. It usually starts in the feet, working upward. About 50% of people with type 2 diabetes will develop some degree of peripheral neuropathy in their lifetime. And here is what drives it, right? Your peripheral nerves depend on tiny capillaries called vasa nervorum that supply blood. The nerves they supply are slowly starved of oxygen and nutrients, and they just don't work properly anymore. And they start misfiring, they might send the wrong signals, and some people just feel like they just have some pins and needles sensation that is kind of vague, but it's annoying. Um, and then you have the kidneys. Diabetic nephropathy. It's the leading cause of kidney failure that requires dialysis in the United States. And your kidneys are the big filtration in your whole body. It's a network of tiny vessels called glomeruli. An accumulation of AGEs thickens those vessels and impairs the function. It causes proteins to leak in the urine, which is not supposed to be there. And over time, toxins build up in your blood. One of the earliest warning signs is a small amounts of protein in the urine that would you probably would never notice unless you're getting a urine test when you go to the doctor every year. So they should be doing this at least every year, maybe every 3 months they do it. Catching this early is one of the most powerful things that you can do. Now, finally, we have the heart. And most people think of heart disease in terms of the big, large blocked arteries. And of course, the blood vessel disease is real and serious. But there's also microvascular disease of the heart muscle itself that impairs heart function in ways that are separate from, in addition to the large artery blockages that we might think of like a massive heart attack. This is called cardiac microvascular disease and is significantly underdiagnosed. Now, all of these complications, eyes, nerves, kidneys, and heart, they are the same process, the same damage, tiny blood vessels, the same AGEs accumulating over the years, different locations in the body, different symptoms, but the same root cause. Now, I want to pause here and tell you a little bit about my dad. My dad was a hardworking guy, big, solid guy, the kind of person who you felt like could do anything and invincible. Now, at some point, he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and for years, the damage was building up inside of him quietly, the way that it does, right? And what I just described to you, now, we didn't exactly know at the time why. You just kind of think of all these issues as separate, okay? We didn't fully understand that we were seeing in real time all this microvascular damage causing damage to his eyes. He lost his peripheral sight and had diabetic neuropathy. He also had diabetic retinopathy and he lost feeling to his feet. At some point, he had infection and had to get a few toe amputations, had a few micro strokes and many heart attacks. And all of these things, really, the root cause is all the microvascular damage, right? Now, we didn't have the complete picture of all these mechanisms, right? And I didn't fully understand that every single thing happening to him traced back to the same process. This glucose that's attaching to proteins, the AGEs that are accumulating in the blood vessel walls, and microvessels that are stiffening and failing, tissues being slowly starved of what they needed. And now I understand it. Now, he didn't get this information early enough, but I'm determined that you will. So let's talk about what you can do. Okay, because I'm all about prevention and preventing those complications. So we don't just talk about the problems, we talk about actually what we can do to solve them. And I want to be clear about something before I give you these three strategies. Okay, microvascular damage and AGE accumulation are not inevitable, especially in the early stages when we don't know we have diabetes. But this process is partially reversible and you can definitely slow it down. The research on this is strong and hopeful. So your actions are more powerful than you think. Now, here are the most three important levers that I think that you should at least start with. There's a landmark study, and they found that for every 1% reduction in your A1C, there's a 37% reduction in microvascular complications. And that's an enormous return on investment. So your A1C gives you a 3 month average, but it is the daily spikes and surges, particularly after meals, that drive the most glycation and AGE formation. Post meal blood sugar spikes are when your glucose is flooding your system and attaching to proteins at the highest rate. Now, if you have access to a continuous glucose monitor, you can use that to track your time and range. They give you a little bar graph, and there's a green area, usually between 70 and 180. And the more time you spend in that green range, the less glycation is happening in your blood vessels. If you're not using a CGM, you can do a finger stick and kind of get an average, or use your A1C as your target. For most people, if you keep your A1C under 7 and your average glucose less than 140, especially after meals, then you will have the least amount of risk for those AGEs. Okay? Then the second thing we can do is watch what we eat. AGEs come from two places. They form inside your body when your blood sugar is high, and they come in from your diet through those high heat cooking foods, right? So the food choices are doing double duty here. When you eat in a way that keeps your blood sugar stable, you reduce those internal AGE formation. And when you choose cooking methods and food types that are lower in dietary AGEs, you reduce what you're bringing in from the outside. Practically, this means moving toward maybe a more Mediterranean style eating pattern, which is my favorite. Lots of vegetables, leafy greens, berries, fatty fish, nuts that aren't roasted, seeds, olive oil, and legumes, and basically foods that are anti inflammatory. These are going to be low in AGEs and support stable blood sugar. It also means thinking about how your food is cooked, right? Remember that high heat cooking, like grilling, frying, barbecue, generates more AGEs than most moist heat cooking, like steaming, poaching, slow cooking, and braising, right? All of these are going to have significantly lower AGEs. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to give up grilling forever, but you need to start shifting towards more moist cooking so that you have less AGEs. And then, of course, start eliminating those ultra processed foods. The ultra processed foods are high in lots of stuff that's going to increase inflammation in our bodies, lots of additives, and it's already adding fuel to an inflamed system. Now, the last thing that you can do to reduce your AGEs is exercise, right? It's generally the most important tools for diabetes overall. It doesn't mean you have to become an athlete overnight, but consistent movement in whatever form works for your life, whether you like going walking or swimming or dancing, whatever exercise is going to help reduce those AGEs in your body. It's going to help utilize your blood sugar so that your blood sugar is not high and producing those AGEs in your blood. It reduces systemic inflammation. Research has actually shown that regular exercise helps your body clear the AGEs more effectively over time. So even a 10 to 15-minute walk after meals has measurable impact on post-meal sugar spikes. And if you do nothing else after listening to this episode, adding a walk after dinner tonight is one thing that you can do to help, right? Making these small, consistent changes are meaningful. Now, you want to aim for 150 minutes per week. That's about 30 minutes, 5 days a week, but you can work your way up, right? Start 10 to 15 minutes and work up from there. Your body will thank you and your blood sugar will be lower and your A1C will be lower and less AGEs produced over time. Okay, now we covered a lot of ground together today, and I want to bring it all home, right? Overall, high blood sugar damages tiny blood vessels and it creates AGEs. They stiffen your arteries and ultimately decrease blood flow to your whole body. And that will then set you up for complications, whether it's your eyes, your kidneys, your heart, and all the serious complications of type 2 diabetes. AGEs, remember, not only come from internal glycation from the high blood sugar, but also from your diet, particularly from high heat cooking, ultra processed food, and your three most powerful tools to slow these, keeping your blood sugar within range, right? After you eat, you want to keep your blood sugar lower than 140 and your A1C under 7, reducing those dietary AGEs, and moving after every meal. Now you have homework, okay? Here's what I want you to do this week. First, I want you to look up your most recent A1C, and if you don't know it, call your provider and ask them. And if you haven't had your A1C checked, get that checked. Number two, book your annual dilated eye exam if you have not had one this past year. Diabetic retinopathy caught early can be mitigated and you can reduce that risk of blindness. And the last thing to do is go for a walk after one meal this week. Okay, just one. Start there and work up from there. Okay. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next week. Until then, take good care of yourselves and those tiny blood vessels. They're working hard for you. Thanks for listening to Ditching Diabetes with the Diabetes Maven. Share this episode with a friend and leave a review so more women can ditch diabetes for good. Grab all of your free guides and resources at thediabetesmaven.com, and I'll see you in the next episode. Stay well.